Despite the title of this video, I could just as well be referring to any trade or social media platform, including YouTube, and it would probably be easier for the YouTube algorithm, or any other, to know what to do with me if I stuck to one subject or niche. Be it wildlife photography like Steve Perry, or wandering hill and dale with a 100-liter backpack full of camera gear and freeze-dried frikadeller like Martin Hilmer. And so I'm not a wildlife photographer. The travel expenses are too high really to make it feasible, even if I stuck to Canada, which has its fair share of wildlife spectacles for sure, and really my days as a beast of burden are behind me. But I did spring for the Nikkor Z 400mm 4.5 VRS lens, though not its $18,000 Canadian 2.8 counterpart. And I do find a great deal of pleasure making my amateur entries into the Wild Kingdom genre. It's very relaxing, except when bluff charged by a grizzly bear. And even black bears, which are visitors to nearby locations, such as our backyard, the damn things keep breaking our fence, climbing over it, well, they also have to be treated with caution. If they start clacking their teeth like that, that's a sure sign you're encroaching on what they consider their territory. And don't get me started on aggressive Canada geese. Don't let anyone tell you Canadians are deferential and friendly. But maybe it's because, after all, I grew up in a small town in England and made my first photos of family and friends and the streets I grew up on, that I feel at home on the street. Though my pro career actually grew out of my mountain photos. But I think I'm more instinctively attracted to people and urban places. So apologies to the fellow who recently expressed his wish for more nature photographs here. Those are probably going to be in the minority, at least over the long run, but don't count out seeing some scenes of wild nature from time to time. Maybe it's due to my minuscule attention span. I haven't been able to narrow my focus to one focal length or genre, and that would no doubt put me on some inclusive spectrum or another today of divergent behavior. Anyway, that's why at one time or another I've worked in giant commercial photo studios, pumping out photos of snowblowers and lingerie, as I like to joke. I've run my own portrait and small product studio, worked as a photojournalist covering riots, concerts. Often that's really the same thing. I've made my own local documentary record of changing urban landscapes, and those now historical photos make up the majority of my print sales, and photos that have ended up in museum collections. And I shot a few weddings. Who, as a photographer, hasn't? But let's not talk of life's misfortunes. Rather than being a jack of all photo trades, my whole career might have been more profitable if I'd have stuck to one thing. Probably portraiture, if I was going to pick. Or no, cars. Cars were more lucrative. I wonder, are there any brain and heart surgeons? You see my quandary. Part of why I'm here, honestly, sometime after my commercial career has wound down considerably, is the hope that I can, in whatever small way, inspire. So now, aside from the marketing skills I've transferred to reviewing some gear here and there, I'm trying to slip in a few experiments with the aforementioned gear to hopefully maintain my interest, and of course illustrate the virtues, or lack thereof, of the gear that I review here. But the photos that I include are my attempts at making my mark in what is today a very crowded global gallery of photographic imagery. And now we have AI muscling in on the scene. That presumption to make a mark didn't start with Instagram, I should note. My audacity arose standing in front of masterpieces by the likes of Richard Avedon. You've heard these names a lot if you've watched many of my videos. Manuel Alvarez Bravo, Ansel Adams, Imogen Cunningham, Laszlo Moholy-Nagy, August Sander, Elliot Erwitt, Jacques-Henri Lartigue, many more. E.J. Belloc's Storyville, New Orleans portraits printed by Lee Friedlander. Man, those just took my breath away. And not because of the nudity, I swear, what some prudes might see as salacious, but because of the unique power of photography to transport the humanity across generations, like some kind of time machine. I must have stood mesmerized by one of those images for, well, I totally lost track of time until I snapped back to my life as an itinerant commercial photographer. That was in 1984, I think. And Belloc is as good an example of any of an anonymous photographer of industrial widgets, as he was, whose, shall we say, personal project ended up in the Museum of Modern Art. So there's hope for us all. Not that I'm suggesting that you start hanging out in brothels with a view camera, but then again, why not? So where was I? I've had the great good fortune, well, I made the effort to attend those shows, to examine amazing prints from the portfolios of those giants of photography at close range in real life, real tangible artifacts. And I know I don't have to tell anyone who has had the same experience how humbling that is, at the same time as how inspiring it can be. Sure, it can also kind of create the same experience as, say, if you're a weekend drummer and you hear and see Jonathan Joseph at work. Or you're a guitarist, even a pretty accomplished one, and you hear John McLaughlin or Jeff Beck. Listen to either of them play McLaughlin's masterpiece composition, You Know, You Know. And indeed, we do know, after hearing something like that they are operating on some other level, or they're from another planet. But no, really what they are examples of complete dedication to craft. They're two men, and I could have picked awesome women like Rhonda Smith, the incredible bassist who played with Beck in his final years, or the drummer Annika Niles. Man, those women absolutely kill it. But as my slight elders, heroes that I followed from my early teen years, Beck and McLaughlin, the latter, who I made my first concert photo of, they're the standard in my books. And R.I.P. Jeff Beck, who we lost suddenly just a year ago last month to bacterial meningitis. Man, that's so sad. But his music will live on. Anyway, the point I'm trying to make is that dedication to craft is what makes for mastery. Not necessarily success, as society defines it. And I have another related rock history anecdote, not so successful as these two, so hang in there or skip ahead. But formal theoretical education isn't necessarily a prerequisite. I mean, a lot of the musicians that we adored as 60s kids, they didn't have formal musical education. I don't think the Beatles could write a note of music, at least not when they started out. And whether you dig their music or not, history has made its decision. They left us some of the greatest musical compositions, not just of our times, but in the history of music, I think it's fair to say. I mean, come on, Day in the Life? Well, it sure changed my life at 15. And don't miss Jeff Beck's tribute. It's one of those covers that, well, there's some songs you don't want anyone to mess with, right? But Beck absolutely owns that song. I think he knew and felt the whole psychological presence that Lennon wrote into that composition. And it was predominantly a Lennon song. And Beck channeled it without words through his guitar, an instrument that he truly mastered and, most importantly, imprinted, is that the right word? With a sound no other guitarist has, ever. A complete original. So I hope I haven't wandered too far from my point, if there is one to this chat. I said I might have done better by staying with one genre of photography. In musical terms, removing superfluous notes rather than stuffing a bar full, like some kind of TikTok assault on the senses, which is why I don't like shred guitarists like Yngwie Malmsteen, or is it Maelstrom, despite his unmistakable technical prowess. I could get in trouble here, I know. Beauty is in the eye of the, or the ear of the beholder. But to me, the difference between guitarists like McLaughlin and the hyperactive shredders, because McLaughlin has been known to fly up and down the fretboard himself, is soul, even at its most frenetic. I know soul is kind of a vague term, but I sure know it when I hear it. It grabs me just like a Bravo or Belloc photo. I don't know if I've managed to fuse anything of my life in image making. I'm more of a dog's breakfast maybe, but I will firmly say that every time one goes out, as I said in my last ramble on this theme, with a specific idea in mind, or just to see what the universe throws at you, that's a step in the direction of mastery. Whether you ever arrive or not, the point is to have a good time on the way, to open yourself to making the best mistake that you've ever made. I'm not being glib. Mistakes, failures are what lead to improvement. And I know it's been said a million times on all the self-improvement channels. It's not a new idea that sprang fully formed on YouTube either. Self-help books have always been bestsellers, and that's why gurus of all kinds drive Rolls-Royces, including John Lennon. My attention here certainly isn't to pivot this channel to a self-help or recipe for success lecture channel. Refer to the title of the video. My God, what a disaster that would be. See link below for Ray's photo neurosis course. Use the code CuckooPix for a 10% discount and a free preset pack. But seriously, for a moment, I'm very much gobsmacked by comments like one recently that said my rambles are like discussing photography with a friend. I'm seriously humbled. I'm seriously humbled by that. And I'm not being disingenuous when I say that I had no idea when I started this channel that anyone would get something like that out of these videos. So as I said, I'll continue with these chats, despite the overall modest view counts, next to the more trending topics like on news and speculation. And I'll do these because my mind wanders. Well, that and the fact that I'm restless. Ask my wife. And truly mystified after all these years by the power of photography to communicate. Again, back to music, which mystifies and mesmerizes in its own way, and try to wrap this up. Music, as I've said, has been an incredible influence in my life. I played in my own bands and jammed with others for a while in my youth. Photography kind of edged out that obsession, but today music still inspires my photography. Can you relate to that? I can sure understand the stories about Eugene Smith, an absolute master of the camera and the black and white print, how he locked himself in the darkroom for days on end with boxes of paper and his jazz collection. Did you know that between 1957 and 1965, Smith recorded 4,000 hours of audio tapes and took 40,000 photographs in the Jazz Loft, a grungy room on New York's 6th Avenue, where all the jazz greats of the day schmoozed and played. There's an excellent documentary titled The Jazz Loft, according to Eugene Smith, from WNYC Studios Presents in association with Lumiere Productions. I'll throw a link below for more info, along with some other relevant ones. I think this thought takes off from something else that I said here recently that's no doubt been percolating subconsciously, how all the arts inform my work. And that reminds me that I need to see more dance, more concerts, and go to more art exhibitions. All creative works can inspire us. Well, strictly speaking, not all. I'll leave that argument for another day. But death metal isn't my musical cup of tea. While I've been putting these ideas together, cohesive or not, maybe just brain fart fusions, this month there seems to have been a cascade of high-profile YouTubers announcing their retirement. They're either quitting altogether or scaling back their channels. Caleb Pike from DSLR Video Shooter, who I mentioned in a recent video, Tom Scott, 6.4 million subs, Maddie Hapoja, Matt Pat, Hannah Witten. I don't even know some of these creators, and they're leaving. There seems to be a generalized malaise in this community. Interesting to watch Casey Neistat, perhaps the biggest quitter of all time, in conversation with Stephen Bartlett on Diary of a CEO podcast. So I had this video ready to go when I watched Casey talk about the value of failure, the necessity of falling on your ass, and what he defines as patience, though I'm not sure he's really not talking about persistence. a word I noticed he used in the place of or alongside patience later in the talk. But whatever you want to call it, that refusal to stop making the thing that you want, that you have to make, because that's what you do. He talked about guitarist Steve Lips Kudlow, the guy from Canadian heavy metal band Anvil, or at least the award-winning 2008 documentary about the band, which documents the rise or resurrection from obscurity of the band. And I'll leave you to search out the story, but Neistat uses it as an example of never giving up on your dreams, or even just cultivating that patience. Perhaps you might call it a Zen attitude in the face of obscurity and failure, at least as it's so often defined today by a lack of social media prominence. And to add what Caleb Pike said in his I Quit video, that he's driven by the simple need to make things, but crippled by the imperatives of the YouTube treadmill, which he's been on for 14 years. For sure, there's another long video in that question. What is YouTube trying to accomplish besides competing with TikTok? What are its directors' core values? Back to Neistat. When Bartlett asked him what he was doing these days, he said he was just puttering around his studio, building a shelf. Just making things which also forms the core of his life's meaning. And he also admitted that he was riding the wave that came from the height of his success, and messing around in the studio wasn't ultimately sustainable. Well, we see a new daily blog. I'm sure Casey has a waiting audience for whatever he does. But what comes out of these admissions, really, of failure? If failure is the inability to keep feeding the algorithm. I mean, I've actually seen some comments on those videos that, shall we say, are not very compassionate, along the lines of quit whining and get back to work. This video could turn into a recipe for failure if I go on for much longer, about a subject the algorithm thinks, if thinking is something the algorithm does, that I'm not qualified to give an opinion on, or that I'm not big enough to promote, regardless of what I'm talking about. If there's a unifying idea behind all the quitting videos, and I made one myself not that long ago, it seems to me is that divorcing oneself from the numbers, from the retention rate, the views, the likes, from audience response ultimately, is the only way to maintain psychological equilibrium and do good work. I've touched on this before. If you're trying to be Casey Neistat, Mr. Beast, Peter McKinnon, or your favorite photographic hero, you're not creating your thing. You're not making your photos. You're not being honest. You're not being you. And what greater failure could there be than that? But I think it's a fair bet that if one thing unites John McLaughlin and Steve Kudlow, it's love of the music. For me, it's the love of visual arts. For you, it might also be photography, filmmaking. For my father, it was the stage, making people laugh or be amazed by the illusion, the magic. And my dad spent way more hours in his workshop making the props for his acts than he did on stage. And not to forget my mum, who created the beautiful costumes that he often wore. But it all comes down to the same thing, the joy of creation, making stuff out of your ideas. Do you have a particular kind of music or art that helps get your creative juices flowing? Let me know in the comments. And I'll leave you with a final thought. I hope it ties up this long ramble. I have a sort of motto, drawn, I guess, from industry research and development, lingo, test until failure. It works well in relation to photography. I don't mean push your equipment until it breaks, though in some circumstances that might make sense. No, I mean take any concept, any kind of shoot, some kind of lighting idea, composition, idea for a portrait, anything, and push beyond the original idea. I said this recently to a model that I was working with. Let's test this idea to failure. Sometimes, often, success is on the other side of failure, but you won't know until you've pushed the envelope what success might look like. In the case of this video, it just means with this fourth attempt, it'll be good enough to make it to the airwaves. But I hope this video chat inspired. If it did, please do give it the old thumbs up. And if this is your first visit and you liked what you saw and heard, please do consider subscribing. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss my next ramble. In the meantime, take care, cheers, and we'll see you later.